So I enjoyed enormously your talk on deep learning. There is no question that the outputs beat us badly. And I especially enjoyed your last part on the hyperreflective material. I think that's 100% crucial in GA progression. And going back to deep learning, maybe there is still some hope for us, for humans. We still can interpret data and make up hypotheses, at least so far. So this is what I'm trying to do now with my dumb human brain. And what I like to do today is to present some data that might suggest a hypothesis to interpret this material that may have a role in GA progression. So let's start with some facts. AMD is a deposit disease. RP over Drusen can be unaltered for years with no apparently malfunction. When we have hyperreflective dots, eventually, for sure, we'll have atrophy. When we have heterogeneity within the Drusen, eventually, for sure, we'll have atrophy. RP is a highly polarized cell that does housekeeping for photoreceptors. Drusen components induce inflammasome, that's been proven in the lab. Macrophage-like metaplastic RP has been demonstrated by Chris and Kershaw, and GA progression is cell to cell. So, despite all the knowledge we have, still the triggering events of Drusen collapse and atrophy are poorly understood. And OCT, even it's not histology, has an advantage comparing to histology. That is a very beautiful, dynamic tool to evaluate changes, almost at the cell level. Not at the cell level, but we have a dynamic picture of all the events of one single Drusen, for example. So what I want to describe today is this finding on subjects that have findings suggesting presumed leakage of Drusen content into subretinal space. So we have hyperreflective RP, we have hyperreflective dots, we have RP defects, we have hyperreflective Drusen content, and we have this material that we call hyperreflective dots that seem to be Drusen content exiting the Drusen through the defect. So we review retrospectively Drusen that collapsed with previous follow-up of 18 months, trying to look for hyperreflective RP, hyperreflective dots, and this material, hyperreflective dots, associated with RP defects. In a secondary analysis, we did the contrary. We look for these features and then follow them to see what was the odd risk of developing atrophy after 2 years. So, of the 34 foci that collapsed in previous exams, 91% had hyperreflective RP, 80% had hyperreflective dots, and at least 1/3 had this material getting through the defects. In the secondary analysis, when we adjusted for age and Drusen, there was an odd risk of 6 times of having atrophy for hyperreflective dots and 65 for isoreflective dots. So there was a real risk of developing GA with these features. So the sequence is always the same: hyperreflective RP, defects on the RP, hyperreflective dots, and the Drusen that seems this material to get out. And this is very frequent. The sequence, it's always the same. So putting all this together, what do we know? And these features, we are trying to suggest this hypothesis to explain a potential contributing mechanism for GA progression. And this is something I'd like to present this. This is something very related to this movie, to Lawrence Arabia. The main thing of the movie was that Aqaba could only be attacked by the sea. Nobody cared the desert. So the cannons were only pointing to the sea. The desert, no one matters. This is polarity, huge polarity. So this is the same what happens to RP. RP is pointed in one direction, and the apical side is the sentinel of the photoreceptor environment. So if we have these defects on the RP because of the RP death, and there is some kind of extrusion of material on the other side, this material at this site is recognized toxic for the photoreceptors, and the RP is activated, which has been proven. So the RP tries to remove this material from this side, but at the end it's overwhelmed, its capacity, and the cell dies. And when this cell dies, the cytoplasmatic material can get out again and activating the neighboring cell and having the cell-to-cell progression, trying to remove the junk. So these are very frequent finding. You need to do very dense OCTs, otherwise it can be missed, but it can be found in many OCTs. These defects on the RP and this material altogether with hyperreflective dots. We also see this kind of emptying of the drusen in the process. The material gets away, so the drusen becomes like empty. And this material that might explain, Kurshu proven that RP is activated. So something has to activate this RP, and this RP gets detached from the RP. This activated macrophage-like. That material could contribute that RP activation. And Mbadi showed that drusen content is toxic for RP, induces inflammation, and that's very interesting what he stated. However, because drusen are solid, insoluble deposits, it's difficult to infer the in situ activity of drusen constituents. One might speculate the spontaneous release of drusen material might be an immediate cause of RP loss. So what was missed here probably is that drusen are not that solid. So drusen can be semi-solid and passage of material can happen. If that happens, the induction of inflammations, it's a possibility. And related to what you showed, this material, this also happens at the edge of the border. That's the hyperreflective material you find in the progressing, because this junk also escapes at the borders of the GA, not only at the peak of the drusen. And this might explain why you may have beautifully resolution of drusen on the vicinity of contiguous drusen. So look this collapsing drus, and this is emptying the material. Look what happened with this drus. This drus resolves without atrophy because its material, this coalescing drusen, its material maybe escape away from this side and then it resolves. If that's true, removing material before getting through this may prevent RP damage. We can find, let's see this case too. This is the drusen that will collapse here. This is the collapsed drusen, and see what happened to the other drusen in the vicinity. They go away without atrophy in this side and in this side, and no atrophy in whatever imaging you see. So neighbor drusen may go down without atrophy. And this is also seen in drusen in the vicinity of drusenoid collapsing. So you have the drusenoid collapsing with atrophy in the middle, but neighboring drusen may resolve without atrophy because they empty their material through the neighbor one. So in summary, this hypothesis is not the primary cause of RP damage, no question, but whenever for the disease causes RP cell loss, drusen material may extrude superiorly, and we call it drusen ooze. These might activate the apical site, trying to protect photoreceptors, to protect the environment. At some point, this overwhelms capacity, so the cell die, and this cell die empties its content, cytoplasmatic content, into the media, and it's more junk and activates a neighboring cell and making a vicious cycle, cell-to-cell progression. And this might be what also triggers this RP to become metaplastic and activated, what Christine Kurshu proved. So in summary, if this is of any, if this can be true at some extent, therapeutic targeting of drusen material before it damages the RP could prevent or slow down the progression of RP atrophy and cell death. And I want to thank my co-authors, and we did this paper on the context of a European IRIS project 2020. Thank you so much.